It's Turtles All the Way Down. I'm Jake, sometimes Jenk. I keep coming back in my memories to a time in my life when I was probably around 13 or 14 years old, and I have this memory of being probably on one of those days that I skipped off school and went to the local library to do my own reading, and I remember coming across this paperback, on the turnstile there. And it was a book called 1984 by George Orwell. And it was probably around 1980, around that time when I'm coming across this book. And I'm thinking, well, I like sci-fi books. I like thinking about the future. This, looking in the inside cover of the book, you realize that the book was written in 1948. It's called 1984. And I'm thinking this could be kind of a cool insight into see what this guy was thinking the future was going to be like. And since it seemed like we were already just about at 1984, it would have been, just kind of a novel exercise to see what the future projection was like. As soon as you start reading it, you realize that there's a lot more going on in this book. There's a lot of subtlety, and it's really more about humans and information and people and truth and politics of the most basic and fundamental variety of human relationships. And that sort of thing really had a great and profound influence on me, and probably owing to all the deep philosophical questions that were inside this book, probably led me towards a life of, philosophy and digging deep into these things. And one thing that Orwell's 1984 is often described as a dystopia, and that comes kind of in reaction to the word that we're all familiar with, utopia. And it was probably, I guess it was exactly 500 years ago, Thomas More wrote a book called Utopia. And he arrived at that title by using basically a play on two Greek words, and the first being utopia, that's EU, or eutopos, which means good place, along with the play on another utopos, that is OU, which means no place. So, built right into the title of that story, more installed within it, this notion that this good place, this utopos, is actually no place, utopos. So utopia has built into it from its creation, it seems, its own impossibility. And, it seems to be borne out by the historical examples. Whenever we seem to have an example of a utopian ideal that's brought out, that is shown to be something that is to be strived for, some way of redesigning ourselves, our society, our people, our institutions, so that we have what is expected to be a great and perfect future. So these utopian ideals that we have many examples of in history, almost always, for whatever reason, almost always ends up in some kind of a tragic, disfigured result from what was originally intended. These unintended consequences keep coming up. There's this other guy that I came across. His name is Jacques Fresco, and I saw my first impression of him in a documentary film about some of his ideas. And here's a guy who has designed these wonderfully engaging visual images of what a city could look like in these concentric circles of rational design, such that you have you're basically a blueprint for a city that is carried out in various manifestations around the world. It has a rationalized order of where people live, where people work, where people, the transit hubs around it, the farming takes place in certain parts of it. It looks like a very appealing, rationalist impression of what the future could be like. But even at that, and I can't help but think that when you have such a perfect design, it's going to be inevitable. The unintended consequences of it are going to come out. And in such a structure, I can automatically see that when you have such consistency of design, imagine all the cities being pretty much the same. People are living in pretty much the same way, same processes are at play. I mean, we're seeing this in the globalized culture and network we have now. There is more and more of a consistency of culture and experience throughout the world. But we're still very divergent and different depending on where you go. But imagine there being more consistency, more of the same. I'm going to think that's going to take a great deal away from human creativity, and some of the aspects of humanity that we find most appealing are those that appear within, the cracks and the inefficiencies of our designs of our systems. It's not so much that, we become greater as humans and as humanity by becoming more efficient in our systems, becoming a more perfect design. That's not typically what gets us to the next level or the next moving of the sticks. It's often those things that we do that are not in accordance with the design, that go somewhat against it, finding its flaws and features and doing something different with them. So the unintended consequences are always what frighten me. And we see this, there's many examples of it in history and in literature. And also reminds me of, we talk about, designing in a way a society or a polis. And, we see that in More's Utopia. We see it in the Stalinist nightmares that could be imagined within the world of Orwell. And he saw some of this firsthand when he was fighting with the leftists in the Spanish Civil War. He sees the unintended consequences of a group, even with the best of intentions, falling into the familiar patterns of human behavior. And I'm reminded of the story of the golem. There's apparently this Rabbi Lowe created in Prague, as the story goes, this creature out of raw material, created the living being out of that which was not living before. And this is kind of the story of the golem, is that this creature would come down from the synagogue and basically, take out bad people. Now, but that story has some unintended consequences that occur. And it is no coincidence that it somewhat resembles the story of Frankenstein. And the creation of the story of Frankenstein goes that apparently there was a weekend where you had some of these writers were traveling in the countryside to Byron's estate, and they went through these parts near where the story of the golem had arisen. And they went to a weekend trip, essentially, and challenged themselves to write scary stories. And from one of these stories, Mary Shelley created the character Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster that Dr. Frankenstein creates. And within that story, as most of us are familiar with, another creature, a living being, is made out of that which was not living. And within that story, we have which has now come to be expected, unintended consequence of creating life and having it go badly for the creator. Going back to the area in and around Prague, there's a story called Rossum's Universal Robots, and it was by this writer called Karel Čapek, and that's where the word robot comes from. And it's I think it comes from the Czech word for drudgery or work or something to that effect. And within that story, as we come to expect now, the robots have an uprising, and they essentially kill every human except for one in that story. And so we've got, examples here where we're creating, in the case of the golem, in the case of Frankenstein, in the case of Čapek's robot, we're creating creatures that live, and we create them from things that are not living, and we have an unintended consequence of it going badly for the humans involved. We've got, previous to that, we talked about the examples of this sort of creating a society or a city or a nation based on designs, and then having that creation quite often, and what seems to be a natural progression of such things, it goes badly. So what is it about, and this is why sometimes I fear design, despite the fact that I hang around a lot of people that talk a lot about design, that are engaged in design, and I'm always kind of fearful of design in that it seems somewhat fascistic to me, or at least there's some association with it, because quite often whenever you have when you have great faith in design, you often have great and greatly terrible results that come from this. When we see it applied to large systems like groups of humans on a large scale, or we see it applied to another complex system, and that is a creature, a living being, we're already given these warnings in our literature of things that could go wrong, and we're doing these things constantly. We're always trying to advocate for designs of our society and our culture and our politics. We're probably never going to agree upon anything there, so maybe we're actually kind of saved. These unintended consequences are unlikely to come about because we're never going to be able to agree on some kind of a utopian scenario that we're all going to build our society or culture towards. But there's that other half of that discussion that we've just been having, and that is the creation of living beings by design. And we're doing that, and we're likely to do a much better job of that. There are market forces at play to create artificial intelligences that will be so complex and complicated that they will confer an advantage to their owner. So as a result, there's pretty much a gold rush out there to have the most powerful artificial intelligence. Such power is going to have a great advantage for the people controlling it. But the fear is that such a power, such an intelligence will soon start to break the bonds of our control. And, the future of a scary superintelligence is something that is being discussed more and more, and I think rightfully so. We don't really know what's going to happen. We've never been faced with such a challenge, in that we might create a being that's going to be so much more powerful than us that it might pose an existential threat to us. So there you have it. We talk about such things in these these episodes, and we'll continue to do so. And greetings to our AI overloader of the future, if you're listening. In this episode, we have Ali Rahnema, who was the head of the digital operations of Canada's largest newspaper, the Toronto Star, TorStar Group. So, being of the world of journalism, naturally we started talking a little bit about news, the media in general, the idea of bias and trust and conspiracies and fake news. All of this is becoming more and more a topic, and even mainstream media is turning the lens on itself these days and asking a lot of questions about the so-called fake news, for example. But what's really happening there is that even though, again, with the best of intentions, we're going towards, mea culpas and asking about how it went wrong, the result of this is that people are becoming more and more distrustful of news and media. So it's having the kind of effect that's going to be still beneficial for those on the dark side, the fascists, the people that try to hide that which journalism is supposed to bring to light. So it almost seems like we really have to work hard to fight against the forces of, I guess, shading or shadowing rather than bringing things to light. As I think Ali says in our discussion, that journalism or news is something that someone doesn't want you to know. So fun was had. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as well. Talk soon.
Populism and populist politics have always historically banked on this anti-intellectualism because, intellectuals are believed to be detached from the realities of day-to-day life, and they're kind of in their own world, in their own cloud, doing their own thing. And the average man, average woman has very different problems and not the luxury of learning more and studying and academics and all that sort of stuff. So I think, the Trumps of the world, and to a certain extent, the Harpers of the world, and Harper wasn't a fascist per se, but, well, that's debatable.
A budding fascist.
And I think, intelligence, knowledge, smart learning, they're used synonymously, but they're not really. I think Trump's, you can't say he's an idiot. He's a pretty smart guy, ultimately. He has achieved certain things, maybe not as much as he claims he has, but George W. Bush, people like to mock, certainly people on the left like to mock that he was an idiot. Well, he clearly wasn't. But, I think the difference between being smart and being knowledgeable already in and of itself, right? We call it book smarts. We have lots of ways in the vernacular to try and distinguish these different things. And But I think bringing it to artificial intelligence, I think the advancements in science have evolved even that concept of what artificial intelligence can be, from visions by science fiction writers to the realities that we live today. I think is my thermostat that can control that's a pretty smart machine ultimately. It's got a single job, and it doesn't necessarily get smarter until there's a device like a Nest or whatever they are, the other ones that have predictive models built into them that can learn, all that sort of stuff. And so, I think that learning versus acquiring information and storing it are probably for me the distinction between the two. Between are you smart and are you intelligent?
But what I'm interested in is kind of the fear reaction that comes to the fore quite often. When I first started school, as a child, I was known as a precocious, smart kid. So I was always constantly being told how smart I was, and rewarded for it and lauded for it. And then you got into the jungle of the classroom, and you started to realize that kids were being beat up for being smart. They were being ridiculed and laughed at. And I thought, what is going on here? Because this seems to be a universally positive thing.
Right.
But there seems to be a fear reaction to it. It's kind of what is that? Is it that I don't know? Is it a human reaction to see somebody, in a sense, have more power than you, and as a result, you try to diminish that by diminishing those qualities? It's writ large in the political campaigns right now that, these elites, what do they know? But they know a lot. and we've counted on them for centuries. But there seems to be this fear reaction and a resistance to it that seems to me could be troubling for a culture.
Yeah, I think the schoolyard analogy is apt. I think I think that the Trumps of the world pander to the fears that perhaps those who haven't had the conditions to have a passion for lifelong learning, to experience new things, to want to do new things. They are positioned as either the elite or detached or not in touch with the common man and common woman and their problems. And so, that's taken advantage of. I grew up in Iran as a young kid and that religion was the instrument of taking advantage of people who were illiterate, who didn't have the luxury of access to school and education and learning and all that sort of stuff. And so the religious class took advantage of that fact and positioned everybody who was educated as either part of the elite or whether they were communists or left or whether they were royalists and sided with the dictator. they were the bad guys because they were educated. Pol Pot famously killed people who wore glasses. And,
Wow.
Mussolini took advantage of the ignorance to build what he built. And so I think, we're living that version of the schoolyard thing, because the dynamic is, the kids who aren't necessarily, smart and don't get a drive out of learning more or testing things or trying things or playing in that way, are threatened. And so, take it out on the smart kids, quote unquote.
Right. But it's in contradistinction to that schoolyard metaphor. It seems that in the schoolyard, the kids that were resisting the intelligence and the smart kids were, let's face it, not smart, not intelligent. But in this case, you see examples of people that are probably quite intelligent playing dumb sometimes, and also, manipulating and taking advantage of the situation. So this seems quite a bit more nefarious. So, it opens up this conspiracy theory way of looking at the world, where you have people that are quite intelligent, pushing the world to be less intelligent and taking advantage of the less intelligent features of the world and the populace in order to get what they want, which is maybe a whole different agenda than what they're saying it is.
Right. Well, and it's easier to focus on the negative and easier to worry and fear the future rather than embrace it and try and change it for the better. And so I think that's the dichotomy we're also seeing is it's Trump very much lives in the me, I, I'm going to do this and this, that, and the other, and this was very apparent in last night's first presidential debate. Where Hillary Clinton constantly used you and we and he constantly was about me and so it's that same lens is there isn't an openness to the future, to what might be in a positive sense. His slogan is "Make America Great Again," which could be very optimistic and positive and if he just made it "Make America Great," I think a lot of people could get behind it. But this again brings a little angle of taking advantage of the fear that all our jobs are going away. This is happening. That's happening, and
steal our jobs.
And in a scary way, exactly. But in a scary way, that appeals to the disenfranchised class, and whether it's the United States or Turkey or Iran, it's kind of the same dynamics.
Yeah. And I guess religion has always been one of those ways to control the people as well, and to get them motivated into doing bidding for the people in charge, essentially. I keep running across, I have some friends that are buying into this conspiracy view of the world, and I'm seeing more and more of it in people that, you would think should know better, are coming up with these understandings of the universe and politics in the world that in which there is a nefarious cabal of people that are getting together and planning and controlling. I've always been of the opinion that no such thing is necessary for there to be nefarious ends. You just let loose a bunch of people with their personal interest at heart. And you will have a coalescing of people that have similar interests that are, without even having to talk about it or plan anything or have any kind of a conference where you can agree on what to do next year. Shit will get done in that way because that's to the best interests of the people that within that worldview. But it's getting to be a larger and larger part of the discussion on social media, for example. And I guess that's relying on kind of a distrust in a lot of the systems that are in place already. And recently there was a lot of talk about how generally the media is very much distrusted, has never been as distrusted as it has in the past. What are you seeing in that regard with the media and its place?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I think, one of the things is certainly, I think maybe focusing on news rather than media, because that's such a broad term at this point. I think in the context of news, if you go back couple hundred years even. News organs were created by either political parties or individual wealthy people or intellectuals who weren't wealthy and wanted to advance a certain cause. And that's kind of what they were about. This whole fallacy of objectivity, lack of bias. I don't think that's actually true. I don't accept that, because I think we all have biases, and we are all trying to do something. And if we agree with the position, it's not a bias. If we disagree with it, it's a bias. But what we're living today is I don't know if you followed, a couple of weeks ago, there was a story of a Norwegian editor who posted a famous picture from the Vietnam War of the young girl running. Yeah. And he posted it on Facebook. Facebook took it down. And I think this is it's a telling story about kind of what's going on and what we're living in is there was uproar that Facebook tore this down. Uproar, kind of inside baseball uproar within the news business and journalism about how this is Facebook exercising its power and its censorship and all that sort of stuff. And in defense of Facebook on this one, Facebook algorithmically, whether done by humans or machines, has a naked kid is a naked kid, and we're not going to accept that on our platform. And they caved, unfortunately, in my view, because of the uproar, and because all the intellectual class and journalists were saying, shame on you for taking this down. This is an important piece of history, blah blah blah. I think expectation or calls that Facebook should appoint an editor that worries about these kinds of issues. And Facebook's should be saying, become a platform. Stuff happens all over this place, and we have to have certain standards. And it's not my job, it's not our job to ensure that everything has a voice. You know what? You want that? To put it in your own environment. Don't put it on Facebook. And I think there's a reasonable argument to be made there. I think the trust issue is because the media has, in large part, been biased, and we choose different titles because we agree with them or we are entertained. I like to read The Guardian because I agree with a lot of their political positions, but I also like to watch Fox because it's scary, but it's entertaining, right? This crazy shit happens. But I think the trust issue is a lack of trust in the establishment, broadly defined, right? That we don't trust government, we don't trust media, we don't trust these sort of traditional organs of how things have worked. And certainly, going back to Trump, he's definitely banking on this thing. But it's the detachment, I think, is where the lack of trust comes from. Are journalists really, at this point, do they really understand the issues that the youth of today in any society are facing? They tend to be older, and they write for older people. Right. And they're frustrated yet that nobody under 30 picks up a newspaper or plays a lot in news. I think you could argue that thanks to things like Facebook, giving credit where credit is due, I think lots of people are far more informed about certain things than they were. But they're also swimming, and we all do this. I swim in, my crowd of friends on Facebook are my crowd of friends, and otherwise they wouldn't be my friends. And so we share kind of similar stuff. I don't, last night I wasn't getting a lot of pro-Trump stuff over my social media, and that's the nature of the crowd I hang out in. And so that's the danger, and I think that's the thing that we need to still solve for in this transition of the old news business to whatever the news business of tomorrow looks like. I certainly, I'm fairly optimistic in the long run. I think in the short term we're going to go through bad stuff, but that's been the nature of history. But in the long run, I think the need for news and the need to trust someone to look at stuff and help you filter, because there's so many things to be looking at, and that's the job that newspapers always did and did brilliantly. And then suddenly proliferation of choice meant that, that's hard and dry and scary and awful, and I'd much rather see pictures of cousins and cats. Exactly.
Well, I guess, we are, as you say, kind of living in a bubble within our friends, a culture of our own that's perpetuated. And but the thing is that these social media platforms that we're on perpetuate that bubble and magnify it to a great extent. That's built into the design of it. That over time, if you click on something, you're more likely to get you presented with other articles that are similar. Is there a way around that? Is it just a matter of, making the algorithms more sophisticated so that it's not so much putting a stranglehold on this, this hose of information getting narrower and narrower in a sense? Because it feels like, first of all, if we don't do that, that's going to be somewhat damaging. And maybe we're already starting to see the limits of it because we have such a polarization. Like you said, I mean, you go on your Facebook, you see pretty much a stream of things that you agree with. And you go on to, I don't know, Uncle John's, whatever, stream, and you're going to see a bunch of maybe racist, Trump thing. How do we get those two solitudes together with the way that the social media platforms are going right now? And the other thing is people can take advantage of this and manipulate this. Zuckerberg is not necessarily a benign character. Maybe not actively, but someone in his position of power could be directing the way these things are done in such a way that it'll move the conversation in the direction that they want it to. So there's a lot of danger there. And I think these people that are doing, what is the Electronic Frontier Foundation and people like that are working to kind of in the weeds, really. It doesn't get a lot of press. And again, maybe that's not surprising that it doesn't get a lot of press because they're pretty much trying to break up the monopolies of the press. Is that a danger? Do we need to shed more light on that that danger?
Well, I think we're living a transition of sorts, right? So a couple of points. I think on the Zuckerberg question, look, that's not his intent. That's not what he's trying to do. Right. He's not in that business, but we've all lived that with editors of newspapers. They do want to move something in a certain direction. And I choose the Toronto Star because I like its politics, and I don't choose Fox News or whoever else because I don't like their politics. And so they have, quote unquote, manipulated us. And it was their job not to manipulate us. And so who do I feel more betrayed by? The people who I pay, quote unquote, or who I hire on a daily basis through my subscription or my choice or my click to help me be a smarter person? Or do I blame Zuckerberg, who's not in this business at all and, frankly, doesn't want to be? And so that kind of nefarious potential is, sure, it's always there. But since he's not in that business, I'm not too scared of it. I think, if on the earlier question, we are, as to put the transportation analogy on kind of the news world, I think we're kind of still living in the steam engine age and maybe transitioning to diesel, but we haven't even begun to imagine what the hyperloop of news looks like, right? And I think that's coming, and I think technology will enable that. But I think so will greater human concern for the role of technology. And I think as we see it as a confluence, I think you can fear the future and fear the singularity or whatever aspects of it you want to think about, or if you have a more of an optimist view of the world, I don't believe in that dystopic view. I think deep learning and machine learning will mean that I will be presented with more and better stuff rather than more stuff like what I consume, right? The fact that, my Amazon feed is a good example of this, right? I have 3 kids, and so we buy a lot of things for our kids. And poor Amazon is so confused. Does it present me as, those who bought this book on artificial intelligence also bought, these chew toys for 2-year-olds. So I'm messing with their algorithm.
Yeah. I wonder if the algorithm builds that in and it figures out, this must be a family, and it's going to get more sophisticated.
Exactly.
So, if it's not doing that yet.
Certainly, by the time we transition from diesel into jet engines, I'm pretty sure the Amazon algorithm will be way smarter and will know that, when I'm buying something at 10 in the morning, I'm probably more after X than Y.
Right.
But and in the news context, look, I think part of it is also we have to recognize that the role of journalism and the role of news has not evolved, has not kept pace, because in World War I, news coming back to Canada, they had to put stuff on boats or planes or whatever and get them across. And so you had, multi-day, many-day delay on major pieces of information and news making it back to this front. And so part of the job of journalists was to talk about these events, these things that happened. Well, that job is gone, right? whether the fire hose, Twitter certainly does a much better job of here's all the things going on at any point anywhere in the world. We haven't figured out the filter on that, which is what editors used to do. Right. But the average newspaper up until 10, 15 years ago, you had a wire desk that had all the wires and hundreds of things were coming in. The Toronto Star had most metropolitan newspapers had a radio room where they would be listening to the radio frequencies of police and fire and everything to see what's going on, and so they were collecting these events. I think those jobs are probably gone and are not even necessarily that essential anymore. I think where journalism has not kept up with this transition is what does it all mean? The guidance aspect of where do I go? What should I eat? That doesn't go away. But, these were jobs that worked in the mass media model of I'm going to put all the pieces of information that a citizen of Toronto could need in one big package, and they'll find the thing that's for them. Well, on the internet, that would be impossible. There's just too much. And so I think we as an industry have failed to be that filter that filter for the digital age and for the modern sort of information architecture of the internet. And so I think I'm quite optimistic that will be sorted, and it'll be a collaboration between journalists and technologists and humans and machines.
So you were heading up the digital division of a major newspaper. So how much of your work and thinking was around predicting the future of the media landscape? Or were you reacting, do you find, to the changes that were going on?
Both. Predicting is one, impossible, and two, forces you into a single point in the future, which I think is part of the dilemma, right? We kind of see this linear world of future progress when really, if you employ 800 people, that's 800 futures, and multiply that by the number of features that they can impact, and then so I don't believe in that singular future view. I think one was the reality of today and how do we deal with that, and the second was what are the potential features? What are the things that we should be banking on and focusing our energy on, and ultimately it wasn't a theoretical exercise. It was a very real exercise with a large newsroom and a large business operation to try and think about what is our world going to look like in 5 years, and I think that the old toolkit of forecasting is so dated, and so thinking about it from a different perspective of here are multiple futures and which one do we want to try and shape is the better way to look at that, and so it was a mix of both, but in a different angle of it.
So what have you seen? I mean, it seems that we've seen a lot of conglomeration, mergers and acquisitions. There's a smaller handful of powers that are controlling most of the media brands that are out there. But all of them are not making a lot of money. I mean, and it's a diminishing return on it. So you're starting to get more consolidation as a result of that. Of course, there's a lot of people that would say that's a very dangerous, momentum that we're engaged in right now. Well, one of the ways that I think a lot of these media companies found a way to have cost savings and also probably even do a better job is to have, crowdsource in a sense. Let your readers become the editors and collators of the information. And this is kind of what I do. I mean, to me, Facebook and Twitter is not really about baby pictures. It's about my friends who I know and trust and to find interesting information, articles, and they'll post it, and I'll read it because I trust their their judgment. So in a way, they've offloaded that work, the editorial work, to the social community that you have. Is that pretty much the only way they're going to be able to do that, or is it, again, we will go back to algorithms that automate everything, and we have an artificial intelligence doing that for us? Yeah,
I think it's important to recognize that a news organism or organization has multiple jobs. One of which is kind of filtering all the stuff out there and surfacing the interesting things you should be learning about. And I think social media or whatever its successor technologies and applications are, will solve for that aspect. The other part of the job of journalism is this is not my term. I don't know whose it was, but that news is something somebody doesn't want you to know about. Social media is not going to solve for that.
Right.
And frankly, you and I as people aren't going to solve for that. I mean, we might in a grander sense, but us putting stuff on Facebook and Twitter isn't going to solve for that. I think the aspect of investigations is something that takes a discipline and a training and an ability to tell stories that isn't in the hands of the average person. And quite frankly, I like you, you're a nice guy and you're a pretty smart guy, and we can talk about what happened last night and what does it mean, but I'd much rather have the perspective of somebody who's covered 10 elections and has all that sort of stuff. And so, I worry that if we take the crowdsourcing thing and a little too far, I used to joke that the same way that I don't want amateur plumber coming to fix my major plumbing problem, I don't really want an amateur journalist telling me about what the future is affecting what my children think about what's going on in the world. And so I think that goes back to the previous comment about the evolving role of journalism and nature of journalism. So if you rooted in what was, there's a bunch of jobs they should stop doing. Restaurant reviews used to be a big thing. It used to be an important thing. And it's still good to have a really good writer completely eviscerate a restaurant that's so full of itself. Those are fun reviews. But, this is a really good restaurant. You should go eat here because this, that, and the other. Well, you know what? There's so much better mechanisms for that to happen. Whether you like Yelp or a vertical of some kind that's focused on that. Same with movies, right? You see more films than because your friend says, "Oh my God, you have to see this because it's amazing," than because some reviewer said so. But back in the day, Siskel and Ebert would make or break a movie. Well, that's impossible in this day and age. And so those are the jobs that probably are going away or devolving faster than they used to. But I think where journalism is failing us today is uncovering things that we should be aware of. Right? What's going on in Ottawa right now on things that I should be worried about? What are the things Ottawa doesn't want me to know about? What are the things that Toronto City Hall doesn't want me to know about? What are the things that in the corporate world is happening in the boardrooms that they never want exposed? And that's where I think we need to, as an industry, the journalism business needs to double down on that. And that we can't distribute. You can have whistleblowers that send you this stuff. Oh, you should look into this thing. That's great. And there's interesting mechanisms that have been built to experiment with that. But the absolute actually digging in and all that sort of stuff, I don't want my neighbor doing that unless if my neighbor's an investigative journalist.
True enough, yeah. What about these algorithms and these, it's becoming very pervasive in almost everything we do, and a lot of it's in the background. And this brings us to another kind of maybe a fear or a conspiracy of the future. A lot of people are taking quite seriously the incoming superintelligence that is on the horizon that could pose a threat, and it's being seen as a threat. And I gotta admit, I'm receptive to that way of thinking, and that is certainly a possibility. Not sure how likely it is or when it's going to happen, but just looking at the current trajectory of computing technology and artificial intelligence research. We don't necessarily know even what intelligence is in a grand sense. But we are making systems that, at the very least, are mimicking intelligence or have what I would call a different kind of intelligence, if not human intelligence. And so there's this notion of a singularity that's coming. There was a previous guest on here, Jesse Hirsch, who made an interesting comment that he said that the singularity is already here. The superintelligence is out there, but it's shy. That it hasn't really revealed itself. It's just a matter of time before it comes out. Do you spend any time worrying about how that's going to change everything?
I don't spend time worrying about it, to be honest with you. Maybe I should, but I do spend time thinking about how again, I think I'm more of an optimist, maybe naively so, more of an optimist at heart than a pessimist. So I enjoy the dystopic novels and films and all that sort of stuff. But I don't think that's where we're headed. I think it's a natural instinct to have fear of the future and fear of the total unknown. Are we making a historic mistake by, and I think some people have argued this obviously already, that are we making a mistake by putting too much power in the hands of machines and algorithms and all that sort of stuff, and we'll pay for that down the road. And whether it's whether it's the Matrix or whatever else, there's lots of good analogies and stories, and science fiction has always played a big role in shaping some of this discourse and thinking. I think our inherent interest as humans, as a collective, so not as individual humans, but as a collective, is to continue to propagate in a positive sense, ideally. And I think the combination of man and machine is so much more powerful than machine by itself or man by itself or humans by themselves. So I think while yes, there's lots of things that could go wrong, lots of things that certainly will go wrong. But lots more people die of car accidents than before there were cars. Statement of the obvious. Lots more people die of road accidents than before there were cars because, carriages weren't moving as fast. And that's true. But on the other hand, so many amazing, wonderful things also are possible that weren't possible before. And so I think if you take today as a constant, as your starting point, and extrapolate to the negative implications of new technologies, it's all going to look pretty damn ugly. But I don't think that's a fait accompli. I don't think that's written in stone that that's the direction it's going to go. I think ultimately technology will make the world a better place. It's going to leave some stuff. It's going to eliminate certain things, certain roles. Industries will be disrupted and forgotten and be in the history books alone. But that's not all necessarily negative and scary. I don't believe that.
But yeah, I'm kind of on board with what you just said there. But I'm also considering that in order for that not to be leading us into kind of a dangerous situation, there would need to be some kind of control from above, in a sense, some kind of regulatory or policy scenario that would try to, get that under control. But we have, hundreds of nation states with different regulations and rules. So whatever we engage in terms of a way of trying to optimize this growth and this trajectory, there's going to be another nation state that's not following that, maybe is following a totally different approach and maybe a nefarious approach as well. So it seems that we're going to get to a point not too distant in the future where what other countries are doing is going to endanger. This is kind of like a nuclear thing. It has the impression of an arms race in that, and even some of the ethical considerations of some of these biological technologies. It's always like, well, you're not allowed to clone humans, for example, but you can't stop China from cloning humans, and they're going to necessarily do things that are going to go completely in the opposite direction of what your goals are as a nation state. So the fear for me is that we're going to need to have a more of a stronger international governmental, I don't know what you'd want to call it, some kind of control systems in place.
Trump voters will love that idea.
Right, So it sounds kind of, I don't know what side to take on it. I mean, it's like, yeah, we do need someone to be controlling on a larger scale or enacting policy so that we don't go off in crazy directions. But I'm also very suspicious and against the notion of having central control of anything. Right. So are we going to be given a choice in the near future between, more control or chaos? And in the direction that the technologies go in, but also in almost everything else, are we going to have to buy into more control in order to... So it's just, and you see this you saw it with George W. Bush's presidency as well. It was that trade-off between security and your freedom. And a lot of people were quite willing to trade their freedom for security. But it seems like we're going to be kind of faced with a similar scenario with some of these technologies. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be AI. It could be nanotechnologies, biological things, where it becomes easier and more feasible for people to engage in this research and to create things that that could be released onto the world as a whole. So how do we get control of all of that without enacting a more totalitarian type world government?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure there's people far more capable and learned to comment on that specifically. But I do think that you know, in the few thousand years of human history, at least certainly since you know, we stood up and started to make things. You know, we have had to adopt our lifestyles, our systems, our social dynamics, our economics, everything to take advantage of these technology things. And look, you know, the first musket was built, and did everybody run around going, "Oh my God, everybody's going to run around shooting each other"? Some did, I'm sure.
But they were right. They're doing that right now.
They're doing more of it, yes. But on the other hand, you know, far fewer people are dying of random colds and diseases and toothaches. And so you know, I think there are trade-offs, and there will be trade-offs, and I think mechanisms will have to evolve as these systems evolve. And again, you know, you have to assume that we all want to work for the greater good, and there will always be bad guys that'll have to be dealt with. I don't know how. Yeah. Again, it's not my forte, but you know, I think. I like to believe that we're all invested in making the world a better place. And I think some of the issues that we fear, you know, this, you know, China's going to do this or Russia's going to do that, are fair and valid and reasonable, and might very well transpire that way. But on the grand scale of history, I think they will be part of the learning curve of how do you accept this? How do you deal with this?
Yeah.
As opposed to, you know, we're all going to be slaves of Chinese bots that have...
You know, and I hold a similar optimism in our capacity and our ability as a species-wide way to the way that we adapt to things. But typically that would take generations to do. But some of the changes that we're seeing within a generation, within a decade, are, you know, disrupting things on such a accelerated scale that, well, we as a person don't have time to react to it. As a culture, we don't really have time to enact new processes and new practices in place that are going to adjust for that. It almost seems like we're constantly going to be teetering from a reaction over reaction. Right. You know, new technology comes out for, I don't know, some kind of a life extension. And all of a sudden, there's going to be political movements and religious movements in opposition to that. And there might be wars fought over, you know, should you be allowed to extend your life to 1,000 years or not? Is that sinful? You know, and we're going to be fighting issues on some strange, esoteric science fiction type ideas that I think are pretty conceivably in the near future, life extension being one of them. How long do you want to live for? Is that...
Yeah.
What would be good? What's ideal?
1 year at a time. I think certainly for another couple of decades at least. Beyond that, I don't know. You know, I don't know. Look, it's you know, if I can be perfectly healthy and have all my faculties and not need a robot to drive me around, well, maybe I'll want to live longer.
Yeah.
You know, if it's just machine, you know, and my mind is plugged into some avatar thing, and, you know, maybe I don't know.
Well, I don't know. Those virtual reality realms are going to be even better than
for sure.
But, you know, there's going to be, and this is the promise of it, is that it's not just that you're going to be able to live longer. The idea is that, you know, you replace your own parts as they diminish, so that when you're 280, you'll feel like you're 60, you know, something like that. And that's going to be very acceptable to a lot of people. But can you imagine the political turmoil when rich people, which would be the first to have access to it, are all of a sudden, you know, doing whatever therapies are required to double or triple their lifetime, and the poor people are saying, hey, wait a minute, this is something worth having a revolution for, if nothing else. You know, I'm going to die and these people are going to live for hundreds of years. Fuck that. I'm going to take out the pitchforks and here we go. So there's some potential for that kind of thing to happen. And let's be honest, if such a technology can be possible, it will be enacted. There will be groups of people that will do that. And so there's a lot of challenges ahead, and a lot of it sounds like sci-fi. It's and I don't know if we're ready for that. But I guess maybe that's what we're doing now. We're talking about these things, and
yeah, for sure. And
early discussions of it. Yeah,
I read something recently that I thought was really interesting about sci-fi, and it was I'm gonna ruin the line, but it was along the lines of you know, the sci-fi isn't a window into the future. It's kind of your first weather station as to what's coming and prevailing conditions that are coming. And I think that's certainly been true, and it's an apt way of putting it. I honestly, I spend more of my time thinking about all the wonderful ways that technology is going to continue to eliminate and reduce disease and poverty and lack of access to things like education and opportunities and things like that. And at a very in a very micro way, you can look at how Uber's eliminated a certain type of business, which is, owning a taxi company kind of thing, as a valuable thing to do. But is that in the long run a bad thing or a good thing? I don't know. It's certainly bad if you held 10, taxi tokens. Yeah. But it's not if you're a part-time employee and want to do 10 hours of work a week to supplement your income, or certainly as a consumer, it's been an amazing thing, and it's made our lives a lot easier and better. But it has huge labor implications. It's I think it's. Are we worrying about jobs or work? Is work even in of itself, the economic model that was built around work, the world you describe will have to have achieved a whole bunch of other things for that to even possible. We'd have to have completely different economic systems for that to be possible. We're gonna probably have to be able to live elsewhere, as in to other planets, because otherwise you'd also have to stop procreation if suddenly.
That's the main thing. Because you look at China has done such a thing, right? They tried to enact the legislation where you can only have one child. Is that the sort of thing we're going to have to move towards globally for any of this to make any kind of practical sense?
Yeah, or children get to go live on Mars. It's great.
Yeah, that's
or maybe the old people get to go live on Mars.
It's so funny. We talk about terraforming Mars and other planets. Right. It's always kind of silly for me because it's a lot easier to terraform Earth.
Live under the oceans.
Yeah, like fix what we have here, and you get a way better return than going way the heck over there.
I don't know. If I could go to Mars, I definitely would.
Yeah.
I'd do a 1-year trip.
That might be possible soon, but not soon necessarily. But there's that radiation issue that if you're out there for long periods of time in space, there's seems to be almost nothing they can do with a certain type of radiation that gets through.
With today's technology.
Yeah, exactly. You have to figure out something more. Time machines, that's never going to happen. Yeah, speaking of space, there's a lot of things that. When you look up into the heavens, you see all these planets and stars, and some of them are. The closest planet is like 4.5 light years away. It takes light at 300,000 kilometers per second to get there. It's huge type of numbers. And I've always been kind of saddened by the notion that you can't effectively see those places ever, because it's just going to take generations to get there. And unless, we're living thousands of years, that's just completely out of reach. And it's not a technological hurdle. It's the way the universe is built. So you look up into the heavens and you start to think maybe even if we're not alone, we're alone. In the sense that you're just not going to come into contact with an intelligence that's 1 billion light years away. And even if you took a ship close to the speed of light, then time dilation would mean that you go off on your trip and everyone on planet Earth is aged millions of years. So what's the point of all that? Right. So it's kind of a lonely, tragic future that we're building for ourselves in order to get what we want. Just an expression of my sadness.
Yeah, no. Yeah, but I think ultimately, that's those ideas are what led to religion, right? Yeah. In some respects, it's you needed something sitting there by yourself, dying, your children dying over stuff, and you're struggling for basic things. And a few thousand years ago, a few people got together and tried, found that as an answer, and it seems to still work for some.
Yeah. I've been, as I said, as a kid, I was one of those asshole atheists that were always picking apart the arguments and, deconstructing everything. And in the last few years, I've experimented with a bunch of psychedelic trips, and I gotta say, I'm much more open to the worldview of looking at things in a kind of a spiritual or quasi-religious way than I've ever been. Which is kind of bizarre in that sense, because of this, that the religious communities are so vehemently against, taking these things. I find that kind of puzzling, because it would make people probably more religious. If they did. If they wanted to indoctrinate people, they should be encouraging psychedelic trips. That's how you get more membership.
Look, I mean, maybe some of us need help to I mean, ultimately, if you are, and I'm like you, I was, raised an atheist and never really, in some ways, never really had the option. I was exposed, but not really in my home, anyways. While I've had curiosity, the curiosity is, how can you accept this mumbo jumbo? How do you buy into this stuff? There's even the concept of there's a you after you're buried and rotting in the ground. This seems just so weird.
Yeah.
So whatever you need to suspend disbelief and accept some of this stuff. And I think, that can come from not asking questions, which is, I think, common, accepting it as this is what it is, and we don't ask questions about this. And, or on the other hand, having some kind of an experience that allows you to imagine, to suspend disbelief. And I think, you never know. Maybe if a whole bunch of religious people were on psychotropic drugs, they'd not believe anymore. They'd be like, "What the fuck's this shit? And, how can I accept this?"
Yeah.
There's funny stories about people who haven't really asked hard questions about religion, kind of being told this is what this really means, and them going, no, I don't want to know what it really means. I'd rather stick to the words as I read them. And I think that's not so much ignorance as there's a comfort in that. I genuinely am consistently envious of people who can associate events to somebody else's will or action, and I think that helps live life a lot more easily and comfortably, versus those of us who don't believe in that and don't have that, whether it's a crutch or a wonder, not to judge it. I do find myself sometimes going, if I was religious, probably so many things would be easier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Socrates, it's better to be a sad Socrates than a happy pig in the mud. I mean, you kind of pay for it in the tragic feeling of emptiness. It's even thinking about psychedelics gets me stoned. But no, what was I going to say? When on these trips, you tend to get into a realm that gets you a different sense of yourself. That's the other thing that's kind of important. And a lot of religions seem to be focused on the idea of the self and the subject, and they seem to be vastly different around the cultures. You have the Eastern traditions, which are diminishing, in essence, within their theology, the value of the self, in the sense that you actually try to take it away to see what remains and what the consciousness is. So in taking these psychedelics, I got a sense of a self that's radically different than I used to think of before, and it's more a sense of not a defined person that you see across from you, but it is kind of a collection of forces at play that's within you, but also outside of you. Now, when you're raising children now, how does that come up in terms of like religiosity or questions? How do you deal with that? Is it because you want to give them the freedom to choose how they think about the universe, but do you find yourself at odds with how to describe things?
Not really, because I think while I say I'm jealous, those are maybe moments of weakness. In reality, I don't really have a lot of questions about that, and I lots of questions that I ask are much more much less esoteric, if you like, and so I think there's a great I think it's a French film title was along the lines of, not everyone had the luxury of having communist parents. And having had, parents who were at one point communists, I have ingrained in everything that I do this notion of a collective, and so I see myself not as a self, but as part of a thing, whatever that thing is, and at different points, and so I think that's so with my kids, I think I'd like to be able to transfer is look, you are you, and that's great, and be yourself, and all that sort of stuff. But that's kind of the end of this selfness, right? The rest of it is you operate within some society or group, and that could be our house, it could be your school, it could be our city, whatever, ideally the world. And religion really is in a positive sense, it's a thing to believe into, a certain set of values. It takes out some of the thinking around, should I behave this way, should I do that, do this, do that, and I think it's not that different as this notion of we live within certain different collectives and different social groups, and I think, I don't know, the question hasn't come up yet. My eldest is 12. She's not asked me, what's this God thing? Do you believe in God?
Right. Could be fascinating.
She certainly had no exposure to religion other than when we were tourists, we go into churches and we see stuff, and it's beautiful architecture and art. We don't really talk about it. She's asked things like, where do we go when we die? And I'm pretty,
Wow.
we live in memories of others, and that's kind of it. And but your body is gone, and she kind of pushed a little bit, but stopped. I think it's also you probably don't want to go certain places you're not ready to go yourself.
But I find children are probably a lot more ready than we give them credit for sometimes. They're kind of holding back all the time. Well, just remembering when I was a kid, it's like, I remember being able to take a lot more than people thought you could take,
right.
And I think that's got to be always true for kids.
For sure, 100%.
I'd be surprised what they can handle. You just mentioned something a little earlier with regard to psychedelics and religion. There's a lot of people, with serious research would tell you that the early Christians were actually kind of a mushroom cult. It's kind of a psychedelic exploration, and a lot of religions seem to have this element there. And some of the rituals are and even the whole concept of the Christ is a sense that there's kind of a being in us all that's connected. And that's really the central message of Jesus the Christ. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but there's this funny thing. Even Santa Claus is kind of based on a mushroom religious practices. Do you know about this? I didn't know that, no. Yeah. I like to talk about this. Well, if you look back at some of these Mongol shamans, back out in the steppes, they would go herding with reindeer. And they found that these reindeer like to eat a bunch of these mushrooms that were growing at the bottom of coniferous trees, like pine trees.
Is that how they could fly?
That's the thing.
Explains so much.
Yeah. So the notion was, once these deer ate these mushrooms, they were prancing around and jumping, and they looked like they were flying. And what these herdsmen noticed was that if they ate it, they started kind of flying around as well. And another funny element to that story is that this Amanita muscaria mushroom, which is that red and white one that you see on like Super Mario Brothers kind of thing, it's apparently so strong that it really only works if it's filtered once through the liver as urine. So don't ask me why, but they would drink the urine of a reindeer and trip out, right? And so these shamans started incorporating it within their religions. And
how did they discover that?
That's a good question. It must have been.
Who was the first guy that said, "I'm going to drink that reindeer's piss, see what that does"?
That's right. Yeah, maybe they figured something out. We're out of water. We got to drink the piss. But boo! What a trip. So these shaman then at the equinox, when which we celebrated ritually as Christmas eventually at some point. The story would be that the shaman would collect these mushrooms, and they would, because it's all snowed in around the yurts, they would climb up through the top, which is kind of where the smoke would go out. So it's like your chimney.
Right.
They'd climb down, and the people would have their socks essentially drying on the fire, and they would put these mushrooms within these socks. So you're starting to see similarities here, like stockings.
Interesting.
And this would dry out by the fire, and people would trip out during important, astronomical events like that. And this kind of religion and these traditions made its way into present-day Turkey, for example, and probably northern Iran and those areas as well. And it kind of got mixed in with the Saint Nicholas story, who happens to be a Christian saint that lived in present-day Turkey and is buried there now. So Santa Claus is actually buried somewhere in Turkey. And then the Dutch combined that story of Saint Nicholas, which they call Sinterklaas, right? So, and then when you throw in Coca-Cola making these advertisements with this red guy, essentially wearing a more colorful version of a Mongolian shaman's outfit, with the hat
the big belt and all that,
the belt and everything. So without knowing it, deep within our culture, we've got this psychedelic cult
it's fascinating.
that's built right into it. And here we are basically, criminalizing all of that stuff, which is kind of another fascinating cultural reaction to something which clearly is an important, integral part of our history, our culture, and our spirituality. But isn't it strange that, in particular in a place like America, it's so vehemently and aggressively snuffed out? So someone who wants to, in the privacy of their own home, take something that's going to give them a spiritual experience, no, you're going to go to jail for that.
Right.
Like, how crazy is that?
Well, it's control, right? Like, I think there's different aspects to religion. There's a great book by a U of T theologist called The Pagan Christ. Have you read this book?
I've heard it, yeah.
Really interesting book.
Yeah.
Really interesting book about kind of, so much of the rights, and it makes all sense, that so much of the what we associate with the kind of rights of the Catholic Church, are rooted in Roman paganism and Roman pagan rights. And this was the way to popularize Christianity through a lot of the things like, drinking the blood and all this sort of stuff, the whole altar, all that sort of stuff is very much rooted in a world that Christianity then later knocked over and aside. And I think all religions, have this, most certainly all dualist religions, come from Mitrism and fire worship and this notion of good and evil as fire and lack of fire and Pyrrhonice or whatever you want to call it, which leads to heaven and hell. Like, all these things are very early stage human processing. Our algorithms kind of going, how the hell do I make sense of all this, and what does it all mean? And I think you veer to the lazy answer of, well, it's just all this otherworldly thing that does everything, and I have no responsibility, or I have responsibilities, but only as set by this other thing. But I think again it goes back to the comfort that religion brings, because you can kind of say, well, whatever. I guess it was meant to be. This is the way it had to be, and so. Maybe in the dawn of going back to the earlier conversation about AI and deep learning, maybe as machines take over, we'll all have to become more religious to survive it or to accept it.
Yeah, it's probably inevitable in this sense, in that this AI that we're going to create, the superintelligence, will very quickly become like a god to us. I mean, in terms of its capacity and its understanding and its way to know us and to even control us. I mean, you think about it, the most powerful people on the planet aren't the most powerful because they're strong and they can lift things or they can make things. It's the power of their words.
Right.
It's their rhetoric. It's their way of being convincing. It's their charm. So imagine a superintelligence that's figured out all these ways of being. I mean, it's going to be very easily able to, create a religion.
Right.
Immediately, and have 1 billion followers that are because it's going to know how to exactly manipulate people. Hopefully it'll
be algorithmic and personalized too.
Yes, yeah. So imagine that, and something that's capable of changing its own software millions of times a second to adjust to get what it wants.
It could be a pretty awesome thing.
It could be. and I guess our hope is that any sense of what we call morality and ethics is shared with us because we, in a sense, created it. But there's a lot of assumptions there. Like, we assume that because you're intelligent, you will have a certain type of morality. But what if you're super intelligent? Would you have a whole other, who knows what kind of morality you would have? Would we be like ants to it, or not even? Would it I like to think it would like antiques and would be the antiques, right?
But I mean, on the other hand, or would it have a profound respect for the beings that made it?
Hopefully.
If it's, I mean, if we're talking at a philosophical level, it could go either way, right? It could say, well, I don't need you anymore. But does it have a need or will to live that's independent of us as its creators? And so does the collective of humanity become its God rather than it becoming our God? Right. Where to go with that. But I think, and ethics and morality have evolved. They've evolved in our lifetimes, let alone over thousands of years of humanity and religion, and have caused wars and battles because we have differing ones. And so I think the evolution of these things excites me rather than scares me. Yeah. Because I think the unknown has ultimately, on the long course of history, has been for the better. There are far fewer people that die today than did proportionally, 1,000 years ago. People still die, and as Hillary Clinton said last night, even one murder is a bad thing. Yeah. But in reality, we're also, I'm not sure, our inherent humanity and stupidity that goes with that is probably not going to be fixed with technology. That's just going to be a thing.
Yeah. Wow. This super intelligent AI, I had this funny notion here. I mean, I'm doing this podcast here, and I'm talking about this AI, and I fully expect something like that to come around, whatever that may be, and how many different forms it will be. So it's not hard to just imagine that this AI that's around the corner is going to have the capacity to basically suck up everything that's on the internet within a second, listen to it all, analyze it, build a model of me, build a model of you based on what's been written about you, what you're saying right now, and could even create simulations based on this. So it's kind of another form of, potential for another form of immortality, in the sense that you could be recreated in a simulation to such a great extent that you might wake up in a simulation and not realize that you're in a simulation.
Well, I think Elon Musk believes that's the case, right?
Yeah.
I don't think he's kidding either.
He says the odds are that we are. And I mean, if you're speaking mathematically, maybe, but that doesn't really mean anything when you have infinite sets. What are the probabilities within an infinite set? I don't know.
But there was a project at MIT last year, or in the last couple of years, around one aspect of it being this notion that your avatar can live on in perpetuity based on your digital footprint, and what you put in that machine, and that will have a sense of kind of your moral code and compass inherently in it. Through advancement of AI, and so I don't know what the application of that will be, but I never got to meet my maternal grandfather, and I think it'd be pretty cool to have a sense of what was this guy really about beyond the stories that have been bastardized over a few decades of what a great or not great guy he was. He was a pretty good guy apparently, but to have a window into that, it's much more interesting than reading his diaries, which would be long-winded and boring. And
but unfortunately, your grandfather is not going to have a digital footprint.
Exactly.
Right. So in a sense, you will. So you're going to have a much more, a truthful simulation of what you're like, or closer facsimile to what you are. I mean, to such an extent. I mean, you look at these Sims type game simulations where you have characters running around. It's conceivable that if you sufficiently increase the complexity of that program and the algorithm and its design, that you could reach a point where these characters at some point gain what we call consciousness and being, and find themselves trapped inside, this digital realm, which is completely lacking a body.
Right.
But you can even imagine them having essences and senses of a body built into them as well. So they're going to be living in that way. Now,
why are they necessary at that point? That's my question.
Why are they what?
Why are they necessary at that point? So these bodiless avatars of whatever future versions of us.
Right.
What purpose do they serve?
That's a good question. I don't know. I just like to think that if this super intelligent AI in the future is out there, it's going to be curious, maybe. And because it has almost infinite resources to run simulations, why wouldn't it run a simulation for everybody? Just just because it's the resources
Because it's
there.
bored.
Yeah, I mean, just run them all at once and see what happens. But even the simulations that we're designing and the AIs that we're designing, the notion is that it's gonna be imbued with our morality. But our morality, as you say, has changed, but it's really more or less built on a foundation of our body. We have mammalian instincts that are really predominant in our morality. A lot of it goes back to those kind of processes and reactions, and below that surface we've got what we call the lizard brain, the amygdala, and it's kind of a different set of morals that we've kind of superseded with a new version of the brain. And then we've got the prefrontal cortex, which is built on top of the mammalian brain. That has a more abstract way of seeing the world. That's more similar to what a simulation would have, because it's not going to have a body. It's going to have only the prefrontal cortex. Right. So it's likely to be missing some of our mammalian morality, which could be scary, because that's what makes us really nice, I think. Right. It's like what we share with a dog and a pig and a cow and a rabbit. That's what's really nice, and that's what we love about humans mostly. If you remove that layer, you become like cold, stern, kind of just completely abstract thinking. What could be like a scary robot, right? Like a scary AI. So in a way to make it more palatable for us, we're going to have to make sure that we include some of our more primitive parts within this new super advanced this being, right? And
maybe make sure we've got some red mushroom algorithms baked in too.
That's right.
You could accidentally stumble upon.
Oh, that'd be amazing. Taking a virtual mushroom by a virtual character and getting virtually psychedelic, and then finding itself in our realm.
As long as it's not my driverless car taking me to the office, right?
Well, see, with the driverless cars, you can trip on mushrooms and go somewhere. You don't have to worry about driving. I asked a friend to be on this podcast, and his response before it was yes or no or anything was, "Why a podcast?" And I had to actually think, why a podcast? I don't know. But one of the reasons was that maybe I'm just getting myself well situated to be the friend of this super AI in the future, right? Because he's gonna look into who's been talking about me before I was born the last 20 years, and maybe he'll be my friend. So in a way, I'm just getting ready for the future super intelligent overlord. And, I'm not selling out. I'm just trying to be friends and emissary. Right?
That's funny. Look, I mean, again, I think this as a species, do we need to be prepared for and fear the worst, or do we need to be proactive about ensuring that that there's within the programming and within the model that you've accommodated for shit going wrong, or do you naively and blindly assume that it will be a good thing? And I guess I think it all comes down to, why are we doing this, right? Are we prisoners of a progress of technology that we are the architects of, that we are promoting, encouraging, enabling, fueling, etc. To what end? And while the singularity may be a reality, the definition will move consistently. And if we're doing this, if all this progress is focused on positive outcomes, as subjective as that concept might be, then I think I'd like to believe that inherently it's focus, and it is not a singular thing. It's obviously a web of things, but then its focus doesn't necessarily inherently have to be something we have to fear. It's something we have to you need to be able to unplug it.
Yeah.
But in a world where if you unplug it, then suddenly everything comes to a halt. You're not going to want to unplug it, right? So this is where you sort of get into this circular loop. But do I want my house to be intelligent, powering itself? Like, stick to the basic technology that we have today, right? Like that I have technology. If I can have technology in my house that allows me to operate and run the thing far more efficiently, far more effectively than today, that's a good thing. Do I need to fear a world where some other mechanism or the MacBook in my basement suddenly decides it doesn't like us anymore and gets the solar panels to overheat and burn the house down? Wow. Sure. I guess it could. But yeah, I mean, that's an asshole thing to do. Why would it do it? What's its incentive to do that, right? And I think...
I think that'll be a true test. It's like a Turing test. When an AI does a dick move. Exactly. So there you go. That's very human behavior.
Exactly. And that's the thing is how much are we projecting our own weaknesses, because we as a race, as an entity, have done some really stupid things. But for what? For territorial expansion, for wealth, for religion, all this sort of stuff. It's going to be unencumbered by all of these things.
Yeah.
And so why will it have the impetus to want to kill us or hurt us or destroy us or whatever? And I don't know that that's necessarily...
Well, yeah, I don't know. It seems it's a natural reaction, much like what we were discussing earlier about maybe the so-called Trump supporter who's afraid of the complexity of that's going on around them, kind of reaches a breaking point and is worried about the elite that are doing and making things and decisions without them understanding it. And the reaction is a fear reaction and like a Luddite reaction and come out with the pitchforks and let's get rid of these people because they don't understand the complexity of it. Are we on a species-wide going to have a similar reaction to this AI? It's like all of us, whether you like it or not, whether you're thinking it through, there's going to be that visceral fear. Oh my God, I don't know what that thing is up to.
Right.
I don't know how to deal with it, so I'm just going to shut it down. And there's going to be, I'm going to guess there's going to be conflicts of people trying to, I think the early reflection of that was someone like the Unabomber.
Right.
Here's think of it as a node within our species. That person is a node within our species that has accumulated certain types of knowledge and understanding, and that's unique to it. It's intelligent guy in many ways, and his conclusions were, "Oh, we're fucked unless we stop it right now." Right, and so he was kind of like the early reaction. Which can't help but have violent response in a situation like that. I can foresee movements coming out of this and religions coming out of this where it's kind of that similar reaction to further complexity and similar reaction to this potential AI that's coming out. And the reaction will be, let's shut it down. It's a demon. And I think, in fact, when you have someone like Elon Musk coming out, again, it's another layer of this guy understands a lot of things about technology, about culture, smart guy. His breaking point's a little higher, right? But he's reached it as well. It's like, oh, there's a danger out there. So it's almost like we all have our breaking point, and many of us are kind of reaching that breaking point of reacting in fear to something we don't understand. And by its very nature, this understanding of the singularity is that we can't understand it. That's why we call it a singularity. We don't know what happens after that singularity point.
But I think, all this, for me, confirms that we're much more likely to kill each other over these technologies than these technologies are likely to kill us.
I would agree with that, yeah.
And I think, if University of Waterloo solves the quantum computing problem, and then we as Canada say, I'm keeping it to myself, I'm not going to share it, and I'm going to use it to whatever, then, we're probably that'll lead to war of some kind, right? Exactly. Yeah. It's just a question of who will get here faster, the Russians from the north or the Yanks from the south, right? But that to me is a far more likely scenario than the Matrix. than that world.
Yeah, I would agree. It would take a lot to get beyond that part of it, that killing and, and conflict. But if we do reach it, I think it's more likely to be a scenario in which there's a meshing going on. And a lot of people that have this optimistic view of the singularity is that before it happens or during it happening is that we are slowly first as cyborgs, implanting things in our bodies and connecting to the network of other people and connecting to other AIs. And eventually you have this emergent being of sorts that comes out, which is a completely interconnected network of all living conscious beings. And then that becomes kind of an interesting scenario, which to me is less fearful in some ways, but more fearful in the sense that it's completely unrecognizable what that experience would be like.
Sure.
Right. And that sounds very much like a religious utopian scenario.
But you know what? If somebody had told your grandfather in Turkey that there'd be a device that could do what the iPhone does, right?
Yeah.
There probably would have been a lot more fear out of picturing, imagining, trying to conjure what this thing would be and how it's connected and all that sort of stuff. And we're talking pretty basic technology and reality compared to what we're discussing, right? So again, I think, the fact that I can't picture it or imagine it doesn't push me to a place of total fear. I think it excites me about all the questions that have to be answered in the meantime, right? We're going to have to teach ourselves as a society, as sets of societies, and this thing, a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of dilemmas to be able to solve for in a rapid way, right? I mean, down to I don't know if you've done the MIT put up a test you can do on some of the things that the driverless car needs to know, right? So you're coming down the street and there's an old person and a baby in a carriage.
Right. Yeah.
You have to take out one. Which one do you take out?
Moral considerations.
Right.
Yeah.
And so these are things that, and you and I may not, if I was driving down the street and you were driving this down the street, we might take different actions as two humans. So how does the machine think about that?
Right.
Or how do we teach the machine to think about that and process that?
And it's kind of bizarre to even think that you should give it in advance what to do, because we don't do that with humans.
Exactly.
We let them figure it out themselves.
Exactly.
Are we going to give them that autonomy?
Or do we societally, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I don't know. Do we?
Yeah. Well,
trying to think.
We push people into certain ways of being societally, but there really is no rules for it. It's not like there's nothing written down that says you have to take out X or Y.
Well, and hypothetically, I could argue both sides of that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
like one of them is Einstein, and the other one is kid. I don't know. It's these are questions we're going to have to deal with.
And these are the simple ones, right?
Yeah.
I think there's profound questions, but again, I think part of the challenge is we root all these kinds of questions in the reality that we know, because the permutations and combinations of the different future realities put together is far too complex for us to process. And so do you even need to solve for that down the road based on a whole bunch of other things will have happened? It might be a moot question by then, right? It might be that self-destruction should be the third option.
Well, that's what I was just thinking.
Right? And why not?
Then you'd want to maybe hack into your car to make sure that your survival overrides anybody else.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, whatever you do, don't blow me up or put me off a cliff.
Or I don't want my device to be responsible for anybody's death. And so if it's me alone in the car, it's a very different dynamic than if my kids are in the car. Like there's all these things that happen, right? If I'm driving alone on the highway and deer jumps in, my reaction is probably differently than if my kids are in the car, because I don't have that, I have a survival instinct, but I don't have a protective instinct. And how do those dynamics work? And
to be honest, I don't completely understand. I don't think this driverless car phenomenon will be long-lived, in the sense that if you're going to have essentially driverless cabins, you just basically have train cars. I mean, you have a highway with a bunch of cars stuck together, moving along at the same pace. You basically just have configurable train cars that are private, like rich people.
Individual.
Yeah, rich people used to have their own train cars. They would just log it on, and they would go with all the rabble on the other train cars. You could have a beautiful Mercedes, which is basically a saloon that you're sitting in with your own bar, and some people have smaller little Fiats or whatever, but then what's the point? Why not just have train system? Do we immediately think, well, this is silly. Why don't we just have train systems where you get to buy your own train car?
Right.
And so it's almost like, It's like a technology that we're kind of grafting onto something future, which might not necessarily make sense. The beauty of the car was it was the individual liberty of it. Once you take that away, what's the point of the car?
Though it's still, I think, I want it to be on my terms. I want it to leave when I need to leave, and I want to go where I want to go and not have to take, it's, even Uber X versus Uber Pool, right? Like, do you want the inconvenience of a potential stop along the way? Some people say no, and that's not worth $4 savings. So I think that's, I think the things that go away I think many of us seem completely crazy is the pleasure and joy of driving, right? Like, but that's in a world where, when you're 14, 15, you start to dream about, getting your license and having that independence and all that sort of stuff. My 4-year-old son, I'm pretty sure he may not ever need a driver's license, right? That's 12 years away. That's a long time, right? I don't think he'll be flying around necessarily.
No.
But in a little pod that takes him to school, and he's, and that's, it's his pod that I've purchased, or it's our kid pod that does that. Like, that seems reasonable. That doesn't seem that scary or crazy at all. And I'd actually probably trust that more than I trust, even a bus driver.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, but he will never know the joy of driving a car. But I don't know. I didn't know the joy of a whole bunch of things that my great grandfather had to do.
Yeah. When I was about to turn, I bought my first car when I was 15. Before I got my license, it was just kind of sitting in the family back garage, waiting for me to get my license because I couldn't wait. It was the most amazing, liberating thing you could imagine. But at the same time, I felt like I'm probably the last generations that will do this, because it seemed preposterous to me even then to have like a giant 6,000-pound steel rolling around and burning all this petroleum just to get to the store and buy something. That's ridiculous. It makes no sense whatsoever, but we don't really stop and think about that. But I'm surprised it's lasted this long.
For sure.
But, and all we've really done is just made that metal beast more and more efficient. But, the idea of that was really dead probably 50 years ago when you think about it. It doesn't, there's many better ways of moving people around than multi-thousand pounds of steel and
it's the life cycle of that technology, right? And what's, what did the world after the driverless car look like? And but will we be moving around as much? Is this
that's another thing.
There's lots of other questions that come into play around, what is the purpose of mobility at that point?
Especially when you have virtual realms that you can meet in.
Or from an economic performance point of view, offices, all these things are potentially archaic concepts, and a whole bunch of businesses are going to be operated through distributed teams and distributed things, and but do we all want to be prisoners in our homes and not get around? I don't know. That doesn't sound like fun.
No, and I think again back to our mammalian nature, we like to be around other humans.
Right.
There's these visceral, non-rational ways that we connect to people in the same room that it's just not the same when you're in a virtual realm. So there will naturally be some resistance, even if it's unconscious. That uncanny feeling of being in a virtual room with you is not going to be the same as being in the room with you right now.
Of course.
So that'll probably delay it. But we see younger generations, socializing in ways that are very much alienated from the physical space, from the meat space, and they're adjusting to it. So maybe that's just our bias, that it's just a matter of a generation or two, and no one's going to notice that or miss that. And
maybe I don't know. Like there was what was the game? There was one of these massive multiplayer games back in the day, in the early days of the internet. And I can't remember the name of the game, but it was, what was really interesting was there was a period that in Seoul, this game represented, something like a third of the total bandwidth used, because so many people were playing it, and it was kind of one of the big things to do and play, and then when so it was the classic kind of, you're a platoon or a troop and going to take something and invade something, and you could buy weapons and all that sort of stuff. But what they found was that gameplay was far more effective if they could all sit in the same place. They were all with their devices, playing their, with their laptops and desktops. But, whoever you were, the commander, it was far easier for you to point at someone and say, okay, now you do this and do that. And even kind of drone warfare and all that sort of stuff still requires people to sit and communicate with each other. And so it's not just our, can you just say to the future, military apparatus, take out ISIS and let me know when you're done? Probably not. Yeah. Hope not. Because that probably has a whole bunch of other implications. Because it may decide, well, you know what, this Syria thing, who cares? Just carpet bomb it, flatten it, and you'll be done.
Yeah,
that would be the fastest way to solve that problem, right? So I think there are things that ultimately, beyond our social sort of the social nature of humanity and community, I think there's also things that we will inherently want to be able to control and that we may never want to give up control on. And I'd hope that some of the military stuff would be in that ilk, because that's where things can go really wrong, right?
Yeah, and those unfortunately are the realms that spend the most time and money and effort to develop such things.
And where our track record as humans isn't so great.
Yeah.
Right? That's where we've done the worst things as a species in a race.
We're assholes, really.
Yeah.
of the animal kingdom, for sure. Yeah.
But if notions of geography and border are different in this same future, and this is goes back to the comment where I think if you just take one line of technological advance, it has really scary implications on the other stuff, right? So if everything is Uberified, does that mean we're all out of work? Well, no, because everything else is also going to evolve in the same path, and so it won't be just that one piece that moves. And so, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. In that progress will come at a different pace in different things, but it will be moving everything forward at the same time. And it's not. I don't think we'll wake up one day and say, "Holy shit, what do we do?" But again.
But we might, and especially.
I told you. I opened with I'm naively optimist about some things.
And the world might wake up November 9th and have a
yes.
Like, what have we done?
But even that, look, in the long term, it's not like America hasn't had bad presidents. It's not that the world hasn't had terrible leaders that have done terrible things. It's an easy thing to compare Trump to some of the worst characters in human history, but he's certainly not going to be that, and he's certainly not going to have that kind of a power, because he'll be dealt with if he does something really stupid. Does he have the power to build a wall? Sure. Is that really the thing that's going to happen? Probably not. Does he have the power to force millions of people to leave the United States when they rightfully should be there? Sure. But is he going to be able to pull it off? No. Probably not. And in the long term, maybe 2 presidential terms later, America has a 3 or 4 party system as a result of the catalytic impact that Trump has. Maybe we'll look back and say, there was a small price to pay, but, is it worse than the price we had to pay with the Iraq War?
You're a glass half full guy.
A lot of the time. I try to be, It's not always easy, but I do my best.
Yeah, I do too. But it's just that it's good to talk about it in advance, to be ready for things, right?
Absolutely.
Even if, without getting hysterical about things. But
it's scenario planning, right?
Yeah.
It's good to have a sense of, exactly.
That's what we're doing. We're running simulations.
Exactly.
Like our future AI overlord will do. So greetings to it. And thanks for coming in today and having a discussion.
No, thank you. It was great. Great conversation. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, Ali.
Thank you.
That was fun.
Thank you. That was great.